Hello, Assalamu alaikum. If I speak like this, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Uh, Maybe Amin, you can open our meeting, or Idrus, whoever's here from Al-Imla.
I think we can see you.
Okay, now can you see me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Tafadhal dan Al-Imla. Hello. Hmm. Hello, can you hear me?
Clear, clear.
Okay, Muhammad sounds. I can hear. All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who have gathered us here after a long hiatus, a long break from our last session in this series on ethics, or the science of ethics, as we have called it with Al-Imla. And in the last session, the earlier proposal was to discuss on good society and the market, or the status of economics in say modern secular societies and its relation to ethics. But I've decided that perhaps since we only have one more session left, it is better to discuss on something of a larger topic, like the problem of post secular ethics, which will encompass, if the discussion takes us there, the problem of ethics in the market sphere. At any rate, what is this thing called post secular society? Well, in recent years, amongst some leading theoreticians and social and political philosophers in the Western world, they have seen that they have seen the falsification of the secularization thesis. What is the secularization thesis? We see in the opening pages of Islam and Secularism, and the books that are referred to by Professor Naqib al-Attas, written by leading thinkers in the 50s and before that, yes, meaning to say in the first half of the 20th century, way up to the 60s and the early half of the 70s. Many scholars, in fact, it was perhaps the mainstream view that as societies continue to modernize, as societies modernize, so too they will secularize. Yes, as societies begin to modernize, so too they will begin to secularize. Modernization is usually related to mm, the understanding of development in the Western sense, in a sense that for Western man, they think that the experiences that Europe underwent, from say the Renaissance to the Enlightenment and in modernity as a whole, that is an a-cultural process. In other words, it is a journey of, shall we say, mankind triumphant, yes, taking one step to another step. And in fact, we look at the social philosophers, the philosophers of history in the 19th and 18th centuries, the likes of Hegel, and later on the likes of Auguste Comte, cited by Professor Naqib al-Attas in Islam and Secularism, predicting that society is moving. They are moving from that they have moved from a state in which their worldviews were controlled by mythology, to a state in which their reason was controlled by, say, religion, and then gradually they reach a theological stage, until eventually they reach the empirical modern stage. And just because the Western world was the first to have undergone that process of development and modernization, they would think that other countries also would follow suit. Yes, if only they follow the logic of development. In other words, this is how they understood a subtraction thesis, meaning to say that human reason develops and it gets better and better over time. So it's coupled with their belief in their initial belief in progress, in absolute progress of human society. They believe that human beings have underwent an onward march of reason. Later on, Habermas, yes, one of the thinkers of the Frankfurt School in Germany, said that the greatest discovery by Western man is this thing called reason that can learn from its empirical surroundings. Of course, they can entertain, and they can include people with religious intuitions, but these religious intuitions are part and parcel of the learning process of that sort of reason which is shared intersubjectively. However, this belief, yes, that is shared by many of the thinkers, including, of course, Sigmund Freud, who wrote the Future of an Illusion, who also believed in the Future of an Illusion that religion is something of an illusion, shall we say, of an illusion that is believed by an underdeveloped and immature human reason, yes, that is incapable of sustaining itself within say the world. They would soon outgrow that with the onward march of the development of society and the onward development of reason. So that was their prediction. Yes, the prediction of many of those in the early 20th century, and including amongst the Christian thinkers themselves, particularly amongst the Protestants. Professor Alata cites a number of them, and furthermore, amongst the leading ones include Harvey Cox, who wrote the Secular City, who predicted that not only did he predict a future of a secularized world, but he also at the same time chose to align the church with that task of secularization. And as trying to they went as far as trying to find the seeds of secularization within the biblical narrative, as if to say that the emergence of the Bible, the emergence of Judeo-Christianity, was an agent that led to the secularization of mankind. Well, this belief was, of course, opposed by thinkers from within their own ranks, and amongst those that was cited in Islam and secularism was Jacques Maritain, who in his attacks, yes, who is in his attacks against the secularization thesis or the secularization process, wrote about the limitations of a scientific reason. Of course, but since our series now is on ethics, I just want to explain the ethical implications. So in his the peasant of the Garonne, yes, the peasant, yes, of the Garonne, what he wrote there was a criticism of the shall we say, the policies adopted by the church, particularly in the Second Vatican Council. Yes, in the Second Vatican Council, in which he saw that the church was actively secularizing. Yes, the church was actively giving in to the secularization process, and not to mention the several thinkers we already cited, and we add to that the likes of Bonhoeffer, Paul van Buren, and Karl Barth, and several other of the theologians who tried to present Christianity within a secular guise. Yet, what they could not predict, yet despite their predictions, or in spite of their predictions, the last years of the 70s and the beginnings of the 80s would reverse the secularization thesis. In other words, there were several events around the world there were several events around the world that ensured, shall we say, that falsified, yes, the empirically the predictions of secularization. Yes, are you following me so far? All right. First, in 1979, yes, we know this world event, the the Iranian or the Islamic Revolution of Iran, in which if their predictions were true, then all around the world, wherever you introduce modernity, wherever you introduce modern technology and its implements, surely society would increasingly secularize. But yet that process was reversed in Iran initially and several other Muslim countries, but also within Eastern Europe. Yes, within Eastern Europe, in which Christianity, especially Catholicism, was central to the removal of communist control in certain parts of Eastern Europe. And then there was the religious Christian revival of South America, out of which, amongst the fruits, we get the present Pope, yes, who came from that background in which liberation theology, yes, liberation theology, in other words, theology shaped as a political source of revival, became a credible movement. Yet, at the same time, also we can say that as Muslims, even from within the Sunni world, yes, that secularization process has not really taken root. Yes, we can say there is an alternative route, that there was, in fact, there wasn't. It is not that there were not attempts of secularization in the Muslim world. If we read Talal Asad's Formations of the Secular, he devoted several chapters. He devoted several chapters to study how, yes, how secular space, how secularity as a social category can emerge in Muslim societies. And particularly, of course, the agent is colonization and the introduction via the legal system and via the educational system and the economic system. Yes, the collapse of the awqaf, the nationalization of the assets that used to be part and parcel of the awqaf. Yes, the waqf, the endowments. The change in other institutions, yes, that were central to the governance of Muslim nations, to be replaced by a modern nation state. And not to mention, in the Muslim world everywhere, there were decades in which secular ideology is controlled, including, of course, communism and nationalism and several other strands of Western-derived ideology managed to control political discourse in several Muslim nations, including, of course, Malaysia and even in Indonesia. Secularity became a category. The idea of separation between state and society, meaning to say between state and religion in the governance of society. Now, while secularization as a philosophical program continued to affect some, but did not manage to affect others. Secularism as a political doctrine became to be opposed even by those who promoted secularization as a philosophical program. What does this mean? Yes, I mentioned, I believe just now, Jürgen Habermas. Yes, Habermas is of the opinion, and so too Charles Taylor, who is Catholic, but he argues in secular terms in order to defend his political position. They outlined what they observe to be the permanence of religious commitments. Already, as I said just now, there is the falsification of the secularization thesis. In other words, that countries do not necessarily become more secular as they develop. Yes, meaning to say that you can decouple this process, suggesting that subtraction thesis in the first place, that the discovery of secular reason was a was a pure development that is universalizable is false. Um, we therefore need a reconfiguration of what really, in fact, happened in Europe. So, according to Charles Taylor, as opposed to the understanding that somehow there is a subtraction theory in which man developed towards progress until where they are now, what really in fact happened was a competing model sort of argument, meaning to say. The rise of secularism became possible because of certain cultural peculiarities of Europe and the West, and that rise, yes, that peculiar episode in the West became universalized through power mainly, not necessarily through strength of argument because of imperialism and so on, but even within its own stronghold, even within Europe and other parts that has been westernized, even within those countries, what they managed was to privatize religion without fully secularizing it, except for those who happen to be secularized in their worldview. Yes, because despite the privatization of religion, meaning to say that religion is kept in the private sphere, that that it remains at the level of, say, moral and religious commitments, but yet in the public sphere, they go by, say, secular ethics, and they assume, yes, they assume that the general public is only committed to secular commitments. Mm. Yes. So therefore, since it is a competing model, according to Charles Taylor, the actual practice, therefore, of secular societies need not necessarily follow strict models of secularism, like, say, laicite in France. In fact, you have other models, like, say, the Anglican model in the UK, in which, although the state has, a weak commitment to religion, but yet it allows the functioning of society based on their own metaphysical commitments. The state may be secular, but the state allows for religious practice within limits of the society. So therefore, what thinkers like Habermas and Charles Taylor, what they are trying to propose, yes, in their writings on post-secular ethics, is how, yes, is how to live now in Western nations and other nations that tries to follow them, knowing that religion is not going to go away. Yes, so that's why they outline a post-secular ethics. Habermas takes the position by developing something developed by John Rawls, something called, the duty of public reason. According to John Rawls and how Habermas develops it, the notion of the duty of public reason is the idea that institutions within a secular society has to be secular. It has to follow, as a matter of moral injunction, yes, according to Rawls, not necessarily legal, but for Habermas, it also has to be legal. As a matter of public reason in the official sense, you have to assume, yes, that only arguments of a secular nature are admissible, not arguments that derive from religious commitments. Meaning to say, you cannot say that we have to ban certain more immoral acts because our religion says so. Yes, but we can say, using secular arguments, that perhaps, you should put a cap and limit on alcohol, because it can increase, say, it can increase accidents and so on. So therefore, that's how there is translation from, say, from a religious commitment, from a religiously derived commitment to ethics, to a moral language which is secular in nature. He adds certain other provisions. So first, that in terms of the public sphere, you need to use secular language. There can be translation. In other words, there can be translation of something you hold on to religiously, but it has to be translated into secular language. On the part of the secular people, they need to at least recognize the existence of those with religious commitments, and they need to commit themselves to a learning process. But this learning process and this usage of, say, arguments of morality derived from religions must remain at the level of the non-formal public sphere. In other words, that which does not involve institutions. Where institutions are concerned, at least Habermas argues that these institutions have to be free of religious argumentations. And furthermore, although Habermas says that at the ballot box you are free, there are several other thinkers who said that at the ballot box, yes, even at the ballot box you cannot choose based on religious commitments. But in practice, these things are very difficult if you sincerely think about it, because if you give the right to choose, yes, at the right to choose at the ballot box, I mean, people will vote certainly based on their moral and religious commitments. At any rate, um, when you see the provisions, yes, he includes also the commitment to the recognition of secular reason when it comes to scientific arguments. Yes, when it comes to scientific arguments, you have to defer. Yes, defer to scientific arguments because they are rigorous, because they are scientific, because they are rational, and so on and so forth. So several other provisions that he has set. Yes, the shurut. Yes, the conditions of living in a post secular society. Now, what are some of the problems with this sort of argumentation? Well, first and foremost, we have to say that um, despite its secularization over the past few centuries, yes, Europe was secularized from Christendom. In other words, it is the secularized Europe is secularized from a form of governance, from a form of social and political structure that is religiously derived, and even its ethics is religiously derived. And despite its secularization, the ethical sources, yes, the sources of the ethics was derived from religion. So while they can say whatever they like about whether or not you should allow religious arguments to enter into the foray into the fora, meaning to say in the public forum, um, or not, this sort of suggestion, setting limits on where and where religion should and should not trespass, where is the threshold that they cannot trespass, and so on. Well, in truth, there is no real solid basis, no real solid argument for its sake, except that it is a means to protect their own interests, shall we say. And the situation reminds us a lot about the Sulh Hudaybiyah. Yes, the Sulh Hudaybiyah, or the Treaty of Hudaybiyah during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you imagine if you remember the prophetic history, what was happening was that the prophet began introducing an alternative religious worldview, an alternative metaphysical worldview, a commitment to the belief in God, a commitment to the existence of the akhirah or the afterlife, certain moral implications of these two commitments, and an understanding of the nature of man, meaning to say, it is a complete way of life. Yes, that is shall we say, summarized or encompassed by the term deen. Now, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam first emerged within Mecca, he was opposed, he was oppressed, and they took measures in order to curtail his efforts of spreading the religion. Gradually, after they have tried whatever means at their disposal, the order was given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to migrate to the city state to Medina or to Yathrib, in which after that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam built his city state in Yathrib until it became the city of the Prophet, Madinatul Nabi. Within Madinatul Nabi, he is the Dayan, he is the commander in chief. Morality, religion, and law is under his purview, with God's command. Now, within his city, of course, everyone, yes, adhered to the commands of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, when, of course, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after several years of, shall we say, of the expansion of the polity of Medina and the expansion of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala's generous and liberal gifts unto them, eventually they were able to enter into Makkah. But before that, yes, the remaining enemies of enemies who remain within the vicinity of Makkah set several conditions that were not favorable to the Muslims. Yes, if you remember some of the conditions, they said, like, the Muslims who intended to make Umrah that year should return and perform it next year. And then, that they ought to do it with their weapons sheathed. Yes, and that when that during this year, they agree to a truce. They agree to they agree that all, and at the same time, additional to that, they agree that anyone who wants to seek protection from the state of the Prophet must be returned, yes, to Mecca. On the other hand, no such thing is required if they were to intend, yes, to leave the city of Medina. Now, this is a one-sided treatise, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who saw with the eye of prophethood, knew that these are the signs of shall we say, the specters of the removal of the shadow of darkness. In other words, this is a sign that the kuffar, the disbelievers, are already at the losing end. This also suggests that the Muslims are now a force to be reckoned with. Yes, whereas previously they were ignored. Yes, but now they were a force to be reckoned with. And eventually, after the year was finished, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered into the city state of Mecca. Yes, the Mecca was open for him, and he then governed Mecca according to the Sharia of Islam. So, to return back to our discussion of post-secular ethics, uh, the politics of it and the setting limits and so on and so forth. These things are all well and fine. Yes, they say that you should not put religious arguments in the public sphere. That you should not allow religious arguments in the educational board. That certain scientific conclusions are not to be challenged within the education system. Certain philosophic commitments are not to be challenged, and so on and so forth. In truth, this is part and parcel of what Professor Naqib Alatas has written in Islam and Secularism in the chapter on the Muslim dilemma. This is part and parcel of the permanent confrontation, yes, permanent confrontation between the West and Islam. Yes, it is a permanent confrontation because why? Because the West choose to remain committed to their secular ideals. They choose to remain committed to their post-metaphysical reason. They choose to remain committed to the consequences of their cultural development, while Islam will certainly not forego what we earn or what we have learned from revelation. And why will we will never forego the things that we have learned from revelation? Because we sincerely believe and we have knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our Lord who has created us, who is the creator of the universe, will not have rida, will not be content with us if we forego his commands and his prohibitions. Yes, his commands and his prohibitions. So for as long as the Muslims are not confused, yes, and for as long as the Muslims are able to Islamize their worldview, and for as long as they remain committed to their religion, their religious and moral commitments, they can advance. Yes. So that's why Professor Naqib Alatas writes in the opening pages of Islam and Secularism, when the consciousness of Muslim identity reaches full awakening in terms of knowledge, in terms of their consciousness of their Muslim identity, yes, will they then be able to formulate, yes, the forms of social arrangement, the forms of government that is suitable for their religious and moral commitments. In addition to that, we can add that um, in addition to that, since Islam and secularism, Professor Alatas has refined this further, has written a commentary on that notion in his book, in his most recently published book in 2015 on justice and the nature of man, by explaining how this can be achieved better and more efficiently. It is by following the command of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Inna Allah ya'murukum an tu'addul amanat ila ahliha wa idza hakamtum bainan nas an tahkumu bil adal. Indeed, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala commands you. Yes, innallaha ya'murukum. It commands you to return amanah, to return trusts to its proper keepers. Yes, and when you adjudicate, when you judge between men, you ought to do so with justice. Just this fundamental verse. Yes, what is this fundamental verse? By definition, it is fundamental according to Professor Naqib Alatas, is because it is the one that gathers around it, yes, gathers around it other verses that also speak about the nature of justice. Hello.
Hello, Panda. Hello, Panda, Abby.
Yes. Okay. Ubaka, can you find Nani downstairs, please? Okay, thank you. He's going to eat. Abi has class to teach. Can you go downstairs? Close the door. You need to excuse me for 10 seconds. Okay. Can somebody take Abu Bakar?
You muted, brother Said.
All right. Well, sorry, Abu Bakar has to remain with me because he's afraid of the thunder. All right. Now, if I speak like this, can you hear me now? Okay. So yes, I was saying in the before I went up, the idea of restoring justice, restoring justice Muslim within the Muslim polities. Inna Allah ya'murukum an tu'addul amanat ila ahliha wa idza hakamtum bainan nas an tahkumu bil adl. That Allah commands us to return trust to its proper keepers. Yes, that this verse is fundamental by definition because other verses that talk about justice, yes, is an implication of this verse. Because you remember there is another verse, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa yanha anil fahsya'i wal munkar. Allah commands that you commands you to be just and commands you to have ihsan, or to have charity, and he prohibits fahsya wal munkar. Yes, prohibit from shall we say, from moral deformity. yes, from moral deformities, and from actions which are lewd. Um, Now, and other verses that talk about the nature of justice, these things they follow from the fundamental verse that talks about returning trust to its proper keepers, and that when you judge from amongst mankind, you do so with justice. Now, why is this verse especially required in our time to practice? And it has been practiced certainly since the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, and whenever the Muslim community adheres to it, then the result will be justice. Yes, to return trust to its proper keepers. By trust, yes, is meant amana. Yes, and amana. This trust is not limited to just the trust of wealth, property, but it is also trusts in the realm of education, yes, economic planning, things that is covered under, say, morals requirements of the society, and the requirements of justice in the political sense. Once it is given to its proper keepers, then these people who are able to.
Mommy Kalu.
Where's mommy?
Mommy Kalu.
No, there's no mommy. So if it is given to
Mommy Kalu.
its proper keepers, then
Abi, Mommy Kalu.
all right. Well, if it's returned to its proper keepers, then you will be able to. Okay, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
Let me just give him to his mother. Okay. Okay. I thank you everyone for your patience. All right. Why not we open for a round of questions then? Or discussions?
Oh, maybe a quick question, Brother Sakwedin. It's very good when you mentioned about the secular element, because in the current situation, I think the yesterday news in one Malay portal in English, there one politician figure mentioned that when he want to expand the term of the Ketuhanan Melayu, not just to the Malay, but also the other races. But I think what is the lack on this on his suggestion is that the definition of the Malay itself, like our teacher Professor Wan Muhammad Noor proposed that if you want to define the Malay, must be they must be a Muslim first, and also able to speak Malay, and also the Malay itself is Islam. But what I triggered a little bit, but when I read some comments in the from that news, there are some comments that really related to what you mentioned in this session, because some of them that the on the personal matters, don't make to the public. And on the one hand, that when we talking about the on definition of the Malay, don't restrict it to the region. That's maybe a small reflection on that.
Yes. I think that's a very good case study, I suppose, to study, well, to study in the Sorry, are you still with me?
Where are you?
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. So to answer Muhammad's question, I said that it's a good case study to test this notion of post-secular ethics. In truth, we have already entered into the arena of post-secular ethics because in our nation, as opposed to Europe, religious arguments are being used to strengthen political positions, and religious arguments are used to justify moral injunctions and even state policies and so on. However, we must be able to distinguish between uh, proper religious injunctions and its proper means of execution, and those who use the name of religion in order to advance private interests. Yes, advancing private interests in the name of religion. Of course, there are certain ethical commitments that will cut across metaphysical commitments. In other words, I suppose people can agree, yes, that you want to keep the crime rates down, that there are certain things such as procedural justice, such as impartiality in the courts, and equality in the economic sense, in the sense of giving equal opportunities or equity and so on. That these things is a good that can be agreed upon based on several metaphysical commitments, regardless of whether or not you're committed to the religion of Islam. You would be committed to that sort of justice. Now, however, when it comes to executing justice in practice, within the religious tradition of Islam, we understand that there are several levels of crimes, or there are several levels of ethical, religious, and moral mistakes, some of which are more are tougher than others. In other words, we certainly do not rank say fahisha such as zina. It has its own had. It is punishable by law, and then but higher than that in terms of had would be theft. Yes, would be to steal, and higher than that would be something like murder. But within the scale of religion, or the scale of religious ma'siyah or religious vices, it does not rank higher than kufur. Yes, it does not rank higher than kufur, which is to or shirik. Yes, and shirik or kufur involves, say, renouncing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even higher than that is to make claims about God what is inappropriate to him. Yes, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, for example, about those who say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has born a son. Yes, takadu samawati wal ard yatafattarna, that the heavens, yes, and the mountains, that they are almost pulverized and destroyed, yes, because of what they claim, meaning to say because of the immensity of the evil that they have corrupted. Yes, and anda'u lirrahmani walada, when they have claimed that the Lord has a son. Now, of course, in practice, with Christians in the realm of society, we treat them as how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has shown. But we know that within our own scale, yes, within our own ethical scale, that such commitments of such an evil act, yes, cannot be something that we would have contentment and rida. And certainly, we would, of course, in terms of matters of leadership, in terms of matters of governance, we would not entrust the entirety of our affairs to them. Because if we were to think about it, Allah commands us to return trust to its proper keepers. Amongst the implications of this would also include in the ballot box, meaning to say that we would choose those people who are more likely to advance the requirements of the deen than those who are less likely to do so. Yes, yet what we say here are not absolving, is not a means to absolve the the certain politicians from, let us say, from moral and religious duties, except that we have to do so now with proper and clear understanding. And as for the discussion pertaining to Ketuanan Melayu and so on, this is a political debate. This is a political question with implications. We say that the Malay is defined in such a way because when you look at a universal description of what a Malay is, an abstract definition, it is one of the most advanced, shall we say, conception of how to define a human identity. If you think about the levels of possible identification of a human being, amongst the lowest, I suppose, would be identification based on ethnicity. Yes, or rather based on this false notion of the biological conception of race, because we know that biologically it is almost impossible to be purely something, because human beings over time has intermarried and so on and so forth. Within your blood, there's so many things. So to identify your identity based on that false notion, which is unbackable by science, is not something that is worthy. Perhaps some people identify themselves based on their language, and language is something of a wiratha, something that you have inherited, which is worthy of salvaging, because what you inherit via your language includes the worldview, includes the cultural products, and so on. And others, it is based on familial relations, and so on and so forth. But when you include, yes, in the definition of being Malay here, first and foremost, being Muslim, yes, being Muslim, meaning to say adherent of the religious tradition of Islam, and then a speaker of that language, and then somebody who follows the cultural traditions of that culture, you now have a definition of a people that is committed to ethical justice, because it follows from the Quranic injunctions. You will not say that my people right or wrong. Yes, you will not. You will not, in your clear conscience, defend the actions of your people. If it is wrong, you would say that it is wrong, because your prior commitment is to religion. Your prior commitment is to the religion of Islam. Since your prior commitment is to the religion of Islam, whatever its ethical injunctions, like not to be corrupt, like not to steal, la ta'kulu amwalakum bil batil. Yes, it all follows. Yes, that the religious and commitment entails ethical commitments, not to not be corrupt, to not involve yourselves in corruption, and so on and so forth. The problem, however, is not necessarily situated in the political sphere. What we have found problematic in the political sphere is symptomatic of what is lacking, yes, of what is corrupt, what is called corruption of knowledge. The real corruption that we have allowed ourselves to suffer and continue to allow ourselves to suffer now is because we have tolerated the corruption of knowledge for so long, and we have not done what is necessary to remedy the situation. And it is the very definition of insanity, according to Abe Lincoln, I suppose, that to do the same things and to expect different results. Yes. So now, why we are being smokescreen is because they reduce our political decisions to to just voting at the ballot box every few years, and to give our moral energies to allow for this political discourse to consume our emotional energies, while not addressing the root of the problem. And the root of the problem certainly is the corruption of knowledge. Yes, because the knowledge that is now deposited, yes, within the hearts of the population, lacks the fardu ain requirement. The basic fardu ain threshold is not fulfilled. And when I say the basic fardu ain threshold is not fulfilled, I do not mean the restrictive understanding of the fardu ain to the performance of the salah and the performance of the zakah and so on, but rather the one which is envisaged in the writings of Imam al-Ghazali in the Ihya Ulumuddin. And that is why the ramification of Imam al-Ghazali, the Ihya Ulumuddin project, yes, is truly a restorative process. If we wish to see justice restored in the political and the public sphere, yes, we need to solve and we need to settle the problems at the epistemic sphere. Now, there are several questions. I suppose here, what if we decide not to vote because we are disillusioned with our politicians? Is this acceptable? Yeah, of course, we have a right to vote and we have a right not to vote, isn't it? But it is, I suppose, at this stage, you have to think yourself. One of the definitions of akal, according to Imam al-Ghazali, one of the definitions of intelligence, yes, the fourth one, the akal bil ghariza, yes, it is, or rather, it is an intellect that contemplates the consequences of its actions. Yes, an intellect that contemplates the consequences of its actions. This intellect certainly needs to be raised, it needs to be sustained, and it needs to be nourished, shall I say, with the fount of aqidah. It needs to have, an aqidah which is jazam in nature. It needs to believe and to be raised on the fundamental understanding that we inhabit the alamul ghaib and the alamul shahada. That just as we are now inhabiting the world, we will soon move to another world in which our actions shall be judged. That just as now, as we stand aright, we were once, yes, participants in a covenant before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the sort of reason. Yes. Okay. Well, I was told there are several questions in the light of the emergence of vaccine, which was unlawful substance foreseen. How does Islamic ethics fit here? So many of the traditional opines that those having those unlawful, it's not lawful. How do we reconcile these contradictions within the bound of Islamic jurisprudence, those who stem from the Islamic ethical fundamentals? What if we decide? So there's two discussions here. Voting, vaccines, and akli and nakli. All right. So there's three questions. One on voting. I think I have answered briefly that voting should not be the only means of our expression of our political existence. Yes, what ought to be included within our political discourse is an initiative to improve ourselves. Yes, we need to run a campaign, yes, to improve ourselves, to improve what is acceptable to us. Because right now, since we are living in a democratic system, what the public opines somehow, shall we say, what the public opines somehow influences the decisions that the governments take. Although within our own metaphysical commitment, we know that that how we arrive at the truth is not based on popularity. We say that since this is the case, in order to make the best of the present situation, we need to begin. Yes, we need to begin a public discourse of improvement of ethics and morals, and we need to improve the public discourse of our. We need to be, shall we say, in terms of the activistic side, we need to make our demands clear. Yes, for the improvements in the ethical and the epistemic realm, meaning to say we need to make our demands clear that we wish to address the root of the problem, which is epistemic corruption. And I say this because we know that if you have been assessing the developments in the political discourse over the past 20 or 30 years, we have seen that the political parties, yes, rather than influencing public opinion, rather it is they that have been shaped by public opinions. So if the society becomes more religious, then the political parties, yes, which is basically something like a reality TV also, yes, like the TV programs, that they submit themselves to those who can vote, and they submit themselves to those with the greater purchasing power. So therefore, if the society, yes, develops themselves well within the religious and moral and educational initiatives, what then will happen is that they will submit to these demands. Yes, unlike in the past, yes, in the times of the monarchs, what was strategic was to focus on the people of power in order to influence the households that possesses power. But right now, yeah, since power has been diffused in several hands, it includes in the hands of those who possess mass media, those who can change public opinion and so on. We need to establish institutions, yes, institutions that can reverberate with proper knowledge. There is another question just now on is it possible and valid to objectificate our religious values become positive law without quoting Quranic verses? Okay, let me see here from the chat. And valid to objectificate our religious values become positive law without quoting Quranic verses, therefore can be accepted by people in a multi-religious society, or is it secular? Now, there is the other question, yes, if we live in a multi-religious society, yes, or a society of pluralistic religious commitments, what is it, what is the model that we should adopt? Well, in certain secular societies, if within their nations you have people who are committed to different religions, if the basic framework is secular, then they will promote a sort of pluralism that does not acknowledge any single faith, to shall we say, to inhabit the public sphere, but they may allow based on the demands of individual faiths. Yes, for example, they may create a public space that can be used equally for religious purposes as well as secular purposes, and they acknowledge different religions to be able to use that space. Yet within those structures also they allow for private structures in which Muslims, shall we say, within that city, that state structure, can acquire land on private property, and they can organize congregations amongst themselves, and they can limit it. Yes, because they recognize private property also within that in order to practice that. Now that is assuming a secular structure of a society. And if they have say commitments to democracy over and on top of their secular commitments, then you can imagine that the survival of that structure is dependent on public support. On the other hand, you still have now remnants of previous models, or you still have enough knowledge, sufficient knowledge of how say a government or a kingdom that is committed to Islamic ideals, how they too can accommodate different religious traditions, like the millet system within the Ottoman Empire. Yes, within the Ottoman Empire, they have tolerance, and they allow for people of the Ahlul Kitab, like the Yahud and Nasara, the Christians and the Jews, to have transactions according to their own law, to have their own legal systems within the larger super system of the Ottoman Empire, which follows the Sharia of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So, in truth, it's when it comes to the public sphere, to the political sphere, it's a matter of shall we say, a matter of consistent dialogue, a matter of consistent, shall we say, negotiations. But where power is, so therefore, when it comes to particular nations, ultimately, it depends on what conception is dominant within that society. So if we choose, for example, in our country, to promote the notion of commitment to plurality, or commitment to tolerance as muhibbah, but at the same time, at the federal level and at the state level, a continued commitment to the Islamic system of the Sultanate, and with Islam as the religion of the federation, then what follows is how you choose to continue from there. Yes, what are you willing to negotiate, and what you are not. Yes, whether or not, so some of the live options in the debate in our country is, whether we want to maintain the divisions between the Sharia courts and the civil courts, whether we want to merge them together, whether we want to make the Sharia court supreme, and so on and so forth. What is interesting, though, is the sort of arguments being put forth. Whether or not we should remain committed to what we have inherited from the previous, from our predecessors, or we wish to change closer to our own present day knowledge. Yes, so this depends on ultimately on political will and volition. If so, therefore, that's why Professor Alatas in the Prolegomena to the Metaphysics of Islam said that as Muslims, however, we shouldn't be wasting our energy in the endless labyrinth of legal and political discourse, but we should, on the other hand, focus on education, focus on correcting the matter of education and our religious and metaphysical commitments, and then we will take what is open to us. Yes, because that's the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what we call the sunnah of mawqif, meaning to say the attitude taken by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in with respect to the environment. Within in the early period, he resulted to several political, shall we say, maneuvers. Yes, including the first migration to Ethiopia, or rather to Abyssinia, and then he ensured that the companions, bear patiently, that they do not respond they do not respond in a defensive and or offensive manner to the mushrikeen. But when they were defending the territorial integrity of Medina, the approach taken then was different, like that. So the Muslims needs wisdom in order to understand what sort of actions are to be prioritized, and what sort of things that you can compromise and what you cannot. We have here is Heraclitus' propagation on change, or they are not permanent in reality, also become major source for Western spirit on morality since, okay. Yes. Now, Heraclitus and change. Of course, with regards to metaphysical change, there are three fundamental positions, isn't it? There is Heraclitus, which opts for change with no permanence. And then there is Parmenides, yes, Parmenides, who opts for permanence without change. And then there is the Aristotelian position, which is in between, isn't it? There is corruption and generation for the sublunar realm, and then there is permanence for the ethereal realm. Well, when it comes to Western metaphysics, certainly over time they have adopted several different models until it becomes the description for their understanding of reality. Whereas initially within the Hellenistic world picture, theirs was a spatial worldview. Their conception of the world was spatial in nature, and their notion of history was cyclical or permanence. But when the Hellenic elements came into contact with the Judeo-Christian elements, the Judaic elements tend to prioritize the historical element, the temporal element, the time element, the notion that the major focus on reality is the element of time and change. So that too came to be part and parcel of the description of Western conception of reality. But their commitment to change now, according to Professor Alatas, but based on the ideas of their own representatives, the idea that they are now always in a state of change, or in Kierkegaard's words in the present age, their commitment to change is because they do not have a singular scripture for them to base their conception of reality on. They have no single conception of reality that they can agree upon. There is no single role model that they can agree upon. And their commitment to empiricism and rationalism, with their rejection of religious guidance, ensures that they can never arrive at a complete and final picture of reality, including, of course, morality. That's why morality is ever changing in the Western conception. Yet, while they admit this, for those who are committed to this post-metaphysical thinking, they also acknowledge that from amongst themselves, there are those who remain committed to their religious traditions. So that's why they now started this new discourse of post-secular ethics. Now let's see if I have other questions which I haven't answered. Is it possible? Yes, how to make our religious values positive law without quoting Quranic verses? And then finally, the notion of the vaccines. Well, so on the question of vaccines, it's still something developing, and I haven't really looked into it. I mean, you need to have researchers that can distinguish between what is speculative and what is certain about it, especially those who are duty bound, like those who are, say, religious officials in the government. They must consult with our own experts in order to determine whether or not what is said is true. As for us, the general public, unless the one who's asking the question is not and have restricted information that we have not, many of these things are still at the level of speculation. Yet I myself haven't done the reading, so I cannot know, do they really use porcine? Do they really involve themselves? But do they use, say, I mean, there are many opinions, yes, but which one is the truth? Well, that is for the experts to determine. Supposing they use porcine, and it is indeed haram. Supposing that's the case, yes, supposing, but I don't know either or not there's porcine or not. Or supposing, and let's just not open the other Pandora's box when they say that it's a means for them to plant chips in our mind and for mind control and so on and so forth. Suppose let's close those and just focus on this. Whether or not, supposing there's haram substances there, then the injection of the haram substance, when can it be allowed? Well, it can be allowed if the condition is darura. Then, meaning to say that it is necessary. But what constitutes necessity in this case? Now, that too is another matter to be discussed by the scholars. To me, I take refuge and I follow. I try to follow the examples of the Salafun Salihin. Yes, the Aslafu Salihin, they refuse to take responsibility by refusing to be um, the officials. Yes, meaning to say they kept to themselves. Since they are now keeping to themselves, they will not be held responsible for the judgments of those who did take up positions. Yes, those who are in the Sharia boards, those who are in the ministries of religion, those who are in the religious offices, they are truly duty bound to ascertain with the best of their ability whether or not it is allowed. So as for the general public, like myself, I, you know, I feel safe that our decisions that if they make the decisions in that case, yes, we trust that they do so with most knowledge. And of course, we have the right to query. Yes, we have the right to query, like how they arrive at the decisions and so on. But beyond that, yes, because this is a matter that requires a lot of intricate study into the matter. Yes, so if they commit themselves to that, then they should be held responsible. Yes, I don't know if this will satisfy you in terms of the answer, but Alhamdulillah, we are not entrusted in this sense. But those who happen to be entrusted, they better investigate properly and ascertain the consequences, and before they decide in that case. That's why Prophet Allah talks about antu adul amanat ila ahliha, that you should return trust to its proper keepers. Yes, and the proper keepers are not necessarily those who offer themselves to be keepers, but those who are truly just in that sense. So if we wish to return now to our discussion, we have to have a proper means of developing proper keepers. Prof. Alatas has outlined that in his book on justice, yes, by teaching about the knowledge requirements, the requirements of justice, the requirements of spirituality and ethics before positions of leadership can be filled. What have I not answered? Oh, yes, the stating of religious injunctions in terms of positive law without quoting the Quranic verse. um, I don't know. Do we really want to do this? Well, it depends on your sphere of influence. If you are a Muslim country, yes, if you are a Muslim country, and officially, yes, it has been recognized as the religion of the federation. If you possess institutions and so on and so forth, to cite Quranic injunctions, what's wrong with that? Yes, I mean, even I suppose in certain parts of the West, when they find a beautiful verse in the Quran, they may not be Muslim, they may not have our same metaphysical commitments, they are not afraid to use it. So why should we be afraid to use what is truly the meaning of justice? However, in terms of the understanding, yes, we have to understand also the idea that we have to be able communicators of our religious commitments, and that's where it is good if you can, in terms of advancing ethical discourse and moral discourse, you can package it in such a way that people of differing metaphysical commitments can still agree with you. Yes. Okay. Well, I think now we've passed the 5:30 mark or 6:30 mark. It behooves me, I suppose, to end our discussion not far from now. Some of you, I suppose, may have already been informed. I announced, or my friend Sharifah Haja announced this morning, that I will be moving to Tarim with my entire family. to continue our studies and to improve ourselves, and of course to not forgetting our commitments to finish our PhD, albeit with done in a remote manner. So as for continuing classes with Al-Imla or other platforms online, that will depend on the quality of the network in Tarim. If I'm able to secure a network, then inshallah. And then if not, we will find time and continue where we left off when we do meet in the future.
Why? 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 Why Tarim?
Sorry?
Why is it?
Why
Why
do I, why do I want to go to Tarim?
Tarim?
Well, first,
Why? Like why?
yes, well, it is the land of our forefathers. Uh, um,
What are this?
in terms of studying religion, the combination of the madhab, the Shafi'i madhab, the Ash'ari when it comes to the theological school, the Ghazalian aspect of tasawwuf, the same commitments that Professor Naqib Alatas has given in terms of his description of himself. The source of that is Hadramaut, yes, Tarim. And furthermore, there are still living masters there that I can learn some of these things. And in terms of my project at the graduate level to understand, before we can understand how Professor Alatas, how he presents his discourse in present day language, we must be able to ascertain and discern, yes, ascertain and discern where its roots are from within the tradition. And if you see our seniors in ISTAC, they have been doing that with regards to the larger tradition. Some of our seniors, for example, traced, yes, the origins of the Islamic discussions on the philosophy of science to the writings of Fakhruddin al-Razi, and those who study the symbiosis between the legal and the theological in the writings of Imam al-Haramain al-Juwaini, and those who have studied the writings of the previous authors as a source of where we are now today. So similarly, we wish to study the same things, yes, and then to develop and see where we can contribute.
Question.
Okay.
Syed, can I ask questions, Syed?
Yes, please, Prof. Sapura, go on.
Syed, will you continue giving talks even though you are at Tahran? We'll be missing you if you do not give your talks.
As I said before, as I said before, it will depend on the internet quality. If Allah subhanahu, if the internet quality is sufficient to sustain a discourse in this nature, then inshallah we'll continue. Otherwise, we'll work out something else with Al-Imla, meaning maybe I can record some of my talks and release it in snippets of 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and you can then post your questions, and then I will answer the questions in that sense.
Well, you know
what? If we
what?
cannot do it live, that is.
You know, I'm not too surprised if you were to choose Mecca or Medina or whatever not. Yeah, but well, sorry, it's interesting. Do they have universities? I mean, sorry, it's a very good question. Do they have universities there? I mean, did they like?
Well,
did they? Well, I don't know how. What are they?
Well, I would I suppose suggest that perhaps you can read. There's a book by Professor Eng Seng Ho. He's a professor at Harvard University. It's called The Graves of Tarim. Yes, it's called The Graves of Tarim. That work has been published, I think, by one of the reputable publishing houses. But you can read it about the growth of that intellectual and spiritual tradition, and you can he even has records of what existing institutions are available in Tarim. They do have, since the past few decades, several institutions like the Rubat in Tarim, the Dar al-Mustafa, and of course there is the University of Al-Ahqaf, which is an academic institution, but focuses on the study of the Sharia. But really, if you wish to study knowledge in Islam, you have to understand the what is the meaning of higher education in Islam, isn't it?
Yeah lah, true lah.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
true lah,
if
true lah.
if you go by what is the true meaning of higher learning in Islam, then you will judge it based on the products, isn't it? You will judge it based on the products of the writings and the people ultimately, because that's the ultimate goal of education in Islam, isn't it? To produce men and women of adab.
Yeah, sure.
Mm.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Then inshallah we will see. I suppose if we have another opportunity, I will be flying on the 4th of January. If we have another opportunity, I will discuss with the team that perhaps we can meet once more. But if not, then until we meet again, inshallah. Fi amanillah. Yes. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to all of you all. I think with this we end our last installment with Said Muhyiddin, inshallah. And I think a lot of you all gonna miss Said Muhyiddin upon his departure to Tarim. And we from the team of Imla would like to take this opportunity to extend our utmost gratitude to first and foremost Ustad Said Muhyiddin Al-Altas for his brilliant delivery of this comprehensive insight to this topic, and also to the past topic that he's expounded previously in the past lesson. And we also would like to express our utmost gratitude to all the participants and hope that you benefit from this lesson thus far. And inshallah, we will keep you updated with the oncoming series when we plan to execute, inshallah, if situation permit, inshallah, next year. Okay, jazakumullah khair, and we request Habib to close this with Ratib Fatihah, inshallah.
Allah, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Al-Fatiha bil qabul wa tamami kulli su'lin wa ma'mul wa salahi sya'ni zahiran wa batinan fi din wa dunya wal akhirah. دافعة لكل شر جالبة لكل خير لنا ولأحبابنا ولوالدينا ومشايخنا ومعلمينا وذوي الحقوق علينا، وبأن الله ينور قلوبنا وقوالبنا مع التقى والهدى والعفاف والغنى والموت على دين الإسلام والإيمان بلا محنة ولا امتحان، بحق سيد ولد عدنان ولكل نية صالحة، وإلى حضرة النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم بسر الفاتحة. يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم.
Bye bye.
Okay then, thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you so much.